or get started. And while everyone is getting settled, a couple of housekeeping items. Thanks to all of you who have sent in your exam schedule. I still have to review a couple that are just coming in, so I should have those dates for you next week, assuming I get them all. Also, with regard to the assignment 1, for those of you who are getting started and asking questions, fabulous. Please continue to do so. And for those who do have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, when you are ready to submit your assignment, again, email it to my email address. It's on the assignment. What should happen is when I receive your assignment, I will reply back acknowledging receipt. Make sure you get that. The reason I do that is occasionally assignments have gone into spam. I have no way of knowing that it goes into spam. You have no way of knowing that it goes into spam. So make sure you get my acknowledgement. If you don't get my acknowledgement within a day, definitely let me know. Try again. We'll figure it out. Okay, any questions? Oh, I have a question. Yes. Word, please. Definitely Word. Does anybody have trouble with Word? If you do, come speak to me and we'll figure something out. Because what I will do is, once I have graded all the assignments, I grade them by using the comment feature in Word. I actually send it back to you in PDF so it doesn't lose the comments if you care about the details. But anyway, so yes, please Word. If you have problems with Word, please come let me know and we will find an alternative. Excellent question. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. So previously on our show, as I like to say on TV, we were finishing up secondary sources. And as I introduced secondary sources way back in our screencast, I like to talk about secondary sources as stuff, very technical term there, stuff to help us find and understand the law. So today we now move from stuff to help us find the law to the law. Those prescriptions that we all agree to abide by as a society. And I'm not going to get into the philosophy of law because I really don't know a great deal about it. But we are looking at the law. So the law is established by government. And one of the handouts that you have is sources of the law. So we are going to be focusing on this handout actually for quite a number of weeks. There's a lot packed in here, and it's a little complex, I will grant you that. But if you understand the facets of this handout, you actually will understand about 50% of the course. So it is worth making sure that you get to know this and understand it. So I'm going to explain it to you how I have structured it to help you understand. So first, just looking at the columns. So basically, the left-hand column is just describing what we're looking at the two columns to the right, and be going over that in depth. Next column describes to us sources of the law when we're talking about federal law, and the furthest column to right talks about sources of the law when we're talking about New York State and municipal law. Okay. So those are the columns. Moving now to the rows. The first row, so the most basic source of the law, of course, is the Constitution. So establishes the structure of government, as you can see in the description. And of course, federal, we have the U.S. Constitution, and each state has its own constitution, and there's actually an equivalent of municipal law. I'm not going to cover any of the municipal law entries today. We will be talking about municipal law and coming back to this chart to talk about municipal law further down in the semester. Okay, so we have the structure of government established by the constitutions. And the Constitution established, at least from the federal side, essentially the three branches. So we have the legislative source of the law, we have the executive source of the law, and we have the judicial source of law. So essentially, at least in the federal Constitution, Articles 1, 2, and 3. Today and for the next 2 weeks, today and next week, we will be focusing on the legislative source of the law for federal this week and state next week. I know a couple of you had some state questions in the screencast. I will be addressing those next week. For those of you who had questions in the screencast, my intent is to address them over the next 2 weeks, and then I'm going to review all your questions again at the end of next week and address whatever I haven't already done so. Okay, so let's look more carefully at the legislative branch with regard to the federal system. So going into detail on row 2. So we see essentially we start with, as you may remember, for those of you who are able to see the screencast, we start with a session law. And session law is just a generic term for a law that's enacted by the legislature and signed by the executive. So of course in the federal world, that's enacted by the Congress and signed by the president. Once that happens, once the president signs and we have a law, it's called a session law. In the federal world, the name for that is a public law. So you've got the generic term session law, you've got the name for that in the federal world, public law. And of course, in our screencast, that was our hero. So hopefully you all remember. Where did that go? Here we go. So hopefully you remember that little graphic. President signs, we have our hero, the public law. Then what happens on the federal end is those public laws get assigned different subjects. We will talk about that term in a little while, and put into a subject arranged source called a code. So it's not only just arranged by subject, but it is also only those laws that are currently in force. If you think about it, public laws have been passed since 1789. If you figure this isn't an accurate number, but sometimes there's as many as 400 plus laws passed each year. Do the math over 200 plus years, that's a whole lot of public laws, right? You don't want to have to look through every single one of those many thousands of laws. You want to know what's the law today. So the code provides us both a subject arranged, because usually you're trying to find the law in a particular subject, whether it's bankruptcy, I heard someone talking about earlier, or landlord-tenant, I was talking earlier. You want to find on a subject. You want to find what the law is today. And that's what the code does for you. And you find the code in several places. The official source is the United States Code. And a couple of unofficial sources are the U.S. Code Annotated, USCA, and U.S. Code Service. And we'll be going into a whole lot more detail on all of those. So in order to do that, let's now turn to the other handout. It's not so pretty as this one, doesn't have any nice colored pictures. The federal statutes, or the story of how a federal law is published. Put that aside, and I'm going to do the same. Okay, so once upon a time, we already talked about the first part of the story where the president signs, and we have our hero, the public law. We're going to keep track of public laws, and I will explain why you care about this in a moment. The way we keep track of public laws is by Congress number and by the public law number. So what do I mean by that? So the first law in the 116th Congress, which is where we are now, is 116-1. So what do I mean by Congresses exactly? So let's move to this website. This is just at the United States Senate, as you can see. So a Congress is just a way to keep track of time. So we started with Congress. The very first Congress was 1789. A Congress lasts 2 years because the House of Representatives sits for 2 years, right? In our Constitution, you elect a House of Representatives member for 2 years. So that's why a Congress lasts for 2 years. So again, if you did the math, you'd figure out from 1789 till now, we would come up with 116. But thanks to this chart, we don't have to do the math. So just to give you a sense, hopefully help you understand how Congresses work, if we look here just at the 112th Congress, started in 2011 and ended at the end of 2012. So actually, if you look up here, the adjourn date, it's a little bit confusing because they technically don't adjourn until the following year. But remember that Congress lasts 2 years. And that's really all you have to remember. And remember that the number of the Congress tells you when the law was passed. You have to look at this chart sometimes to figure out the year. Hopefully to help understand a little bit better. So I'm going to a different website now, congress.gov. All of these links are on the course website. If you're interested in going back for any reason, it's not necessary. Again, just to give you a sense of how the public laws are numbered. So we're talking about the 116th Congress. So we're talking about the Congress that started in 2019 and will be the end of this year in 2020. This is just organized reverse numbers. So the most recent law that's been put up here is Public Law 116-113. That just means it was the 113th public law to be enacted in the 116th Congress that started January of 2019 and has to do with, this is the USMCA, which has been in the news a lot. So that is public law that was passed by Congress, obviously pretty recently, a few days ago. And so going down just randomly, Public Law 116-100, again, passed in the 116th Congress. That first number of the public law is always the Congress, and it just happens to be the 100th law. You don't really care it's the 100th law, the 113th law, but you do care about the Congress. That tells you the time period. Okay, so that's a little bit about how public laws are numbered. So then what happens to a public law? So now we're going bimodal here, possibly trimodal if we really get fancy. I'm going to ask you to look at the other handout labeled on the front page, Advanced Legal Research, Statutes Part 1. This is what is referred to as a walkthrough. It's a lot of copies of pages so that you can see the details of the particular pages as we are discussing them. I always find this more useful than just showing stuff on the screen because it's a little fuzzy and you don't always see the details. And at the end of the semester, I always ask students, are these worth the number of trees that I killed to make these printouts? And everybody usually says yes. So I will be interested in your input at the end of the semester on that question. But for now, let's take a look so you can see what you think. So this is Statutes Part 1. So turning the page. And this is something already noticed, you've already seen on the screencast on page 1. This is the title page of the United States Statutes at Large. So I joked in our screencast that this is one of the planets on which public laws live. And you saw a picture on the screencast, but here is the actual volume in the paper, or flesh, if you will, of volume 88 of the U.S. Statutes at Large, which is the example on page 1. A little bit of show and tell here. So I'm going to pass this around if anyone's interested in looking at the book. These days, it's also available online. No real difference. They both reflect the same thing. So there's volume 88. So if I were interested in, for instance, and we will be interested in Public Law 93-406, again, that's telling me 93rd Congress, 406th law passed, I would find it in volume 88 of the Statutes at Large. And I know that because if you see our handy dandy arrow here, points to Public Laws 93-246 through 93-446. Obviously, 406 falls in the middle there. Okay, so this is where our Public Law 93-406 lives. So let's turn the page. So we turn the volume to where Public Law 93-406 actually starts. That's what we see on page 2. And there's some interesting information here I'd like to highlight. First, top of the page, we see the citation. On the top left, we see 88 stat. Again, that just means volume 88. The name of the set is Statutes at Large. It's abbreviated STAT. Helpful if you remember that. So this way, whenever you see STAT, you know that means Statutes at Large. On the right-hand side of the top of the page, we see 829. That's just the page. It's the page that this public law starts on. And I refer in the little notes there that statutes at large citation in two parts. So it's the volume part and the page part. That's just a standard citation format that we're all used to in the law. Then we see the public law number. So I've already suggested to you that we're going to be interested in 93406. And there's a little teaser here on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go into detail on this right now, but we'll get there very soon. Where to find this in the U.S. Code. Then we get down to Title I, Protection of Employee Benefits Rights. And I write here on the side here, subject area of act. So the word title in the law means subject area. It's used in a couple of different contexts, which can sometimes confuse people. In this context, it's used in the public law to indicate a subject area within a single public law. So within this single public law, 93406, this is the first subject area that it covers, protection of employee benefit rights. And then you see this is our good friend, the table of contents, just listing the sections of the public law. So section 1, section 2, and so forth. Questions so far? Excellent. Turning to page 3. You just see the next page in the public law 93406 and the table of contents continued. It may not even be the next, it's the next page. Table of contents continued, and then we see a reference to Title II. Again, title is subject area, so subject area number 2, and this is amendments to Internal Revenue Code. This is a totally different subject area, right? Internal Revenue Code is tax, and Title I had to do with employee benefit rights, so two different subject areas. Again, title is a subject area. In this context, subject area is covered in this public law. And then we see the sections of the public law beneath. Everybody good so far? And then turning to page 4. Oh, my bad, I'm sorry, on page 3. Again, I just wanted to throw out a teaser there because we're going to be looking at this. I had a handy dandy arrow to the end of Title I, to the end of our protection of employee benefit rights subject area, to section 514, effect on other laws. Just make a mental note, 514 might be important. Okay, let's now turn to page 4. Now we finally get to the actual text of Public Law 93406, and as we've already learned from the table of contents, Title I covers protection of employee benefit rights. What we see on the left, and this is now no longer a little teaser, we see a reference to the U.S. Code, right? USC stands for U.S. Code. And standard legal abbreviation format, we see the title number on the volume, or in this case, it's the title number. It's not the volume number. Title number on the left, Title 29, the code abbreviation, U.S. Code, and the section number. So title number. Wait a minute, I was talking about titles as subject areas in the public law. This is where that using the word title in a couple of different contexts can confuse people. Titles are also used as referencing subject areas in the entire U.S. Code containing tens or thousands of public laws. So there's a title in the U.S. Code, Title 29, and then there are titles within public laws. Lots of other titles in the U.S. Code in addition to 29. We'll be looking at that shortly. So everybody understand this word title means subject area, but it can mean subject area in different contexts. Sometimes in public law, sometimes in a code. And then, of course, we have the section number. So we have Title 29, U.S. Code, section number 1001. What this little note is telling us is where to find this section of the public law. This section that we're looking at is section 2. Everybody see section 2? So section 2 of Public Law 93406 can be found in Title 29, U.S. Code, section 1001. Shall I say that again, or does that make sense? So think of it another way. Let's just look at the section number for the moment. We're finding section 2 of the public law in section 1001 of the U.S. Code. The point of this is that the section numbering in the public law pretty much never matches where it winds up as a section number in the US code, right? 2 and 1001 do not equal, are not the same. That's as much math as I get to in this class. 2 is not the same as 1001. So want to remember that the section numbers in public law do not wind up to be the same section numbers in the US code. So when this section got transferred over to the US code in the subject arrangement, it got assigned a totally different section number. I know I'm belaboring this point. It's intentional. Really useful. If you understand this, you will save yourself a whole lot of confusion forever, basically. Question?
Yeah, I'm just like curious about the section here under the title and the code.
So we're looking at, so let's go back to the table of contents on page 2. On page 2, we see that section 2 of the public law, so public law 93406 was passed in 1974. You see the date up top. And section 2 is findings, called Findings and Declaration of Policy. So we're good with that. That's section 2 of the public law when it's passed in 1974. Back on page 4, what this little note on the right is telling me is that when this public law gets put in the code, and it gets put in that subject arrangement that we're talking about, the section number just gets changed. They don't keep 2, they assign it whatever in. We don't, in the code, we don't use it. Okay. Other questions? Excellent. So let's turn to page 5. On page 5, we're looking at the definitions section, which in the public law is section 3. And when it gets transferred over to the US code, becomes section 1002. I mentioned in a note here, definition sections are always worth looking at. As I mentioned in our first class, very inelegantly, law is words. Or if I want to be more grammatical, law is comprised of words. So if you have a section saying such and such word means this, since words are the basis of what we do, we want to look at that definition section. So always keep your eyes open for definition sections. Okay. And again, now section numbers, it just gets changed, I think. Mohammed, you said it best. We don't use the section number once we get to the code. Or we don't use the public law section number once we get to the code. Let me make sure I'm very clear. Questions? As we turn to page 6. And on page 6, you might notice, not quite halfway down, effect on other laws. And we see that section 514. Remember, I made us turn back so we could highlight, just put in your mind somewhere 514 is going to be discussed. Well, here's where it's discussed. Turns out section 514 winds up being in the US code at 29. So that's title 29, which is the labor code. Title 29 of the US code 1144. Does that ring a bell to anybody? That's the reference we got from the secondary source in ALR way back. I think it was in the first or second class, probably the second class, way back in the second class of where our ERISA preemption section is. So that's section 291144, which we would click on and read what the law is today. As we can see, that's the site in the code that we got in secondary source, 29 USC 1144. That started as section 514 in public law 93406. So that's where section 1144 was born, if you will, as section 514. All good? Turning to page 7, we then move to Title 2, a different subject area within the public law, internal revenue. Tax, essentially. Going down a little bit in the page, we see that little note on the side. The tax subject area turns out to be in Title 26 of the US Code. So Title 26, again, title, subject area, number 26, is internal revenue in the U.S. Code, and that's discussed in Title II or Subject Area 2 of the Public Law 93-406. We all good? Questions?
So there are no reclassifications of, like, let's say, section 410. Just to make it easy to go back, right, the one you just cited, section 29 USC 1144, right? Let's say they decide that it doesn't fit into that subject matter anymore. They then change it to a different part of the use.
Yes, absolutely. That has happened. I'm not going to get the exact details right, so don't quote me on that, but there was, I forget if the title was called War, and then they reclassified it, and now it's Army. I'd have to look at see if I can, but the short answer is yes, that does happen. Not very frequently, but it does happen. Other questions? Okay. So let's move to page 8. So as you may remember from the screencast, we can find public laws actually technically on 2 different planets, as I like to call them. So the official source is statutes at large, or the official planet. You have an official planet? We now have an official planet. Is statutes at large. The unofficial planet. An official planet, you should be able to have an unofficial planet, right? The unofficial source is U.S. Code, Congressional, and Administrative News, and I'm never going to ask you to say that in full again. What you want to remember is USCAN. And the main reason you want to remember USCAN is you will see it cited. So if you see it cited, you should know what it is. And what it is, or one of the things it does, is it publishes unofficially the public laws. So I'm going to pass around another more weightlifting opportunity here. The volume of USCAN that contains 93-406. And you see the page on page 8 of our handout. Now you'll notice USCAN isn't numbered consecutively. The volumes aren't numbered consecutively. So here's volume 1 for 1974. There'll be another volume 1 for 1975 and another volume 1 for 1976. So you don't really keep track in USCAN by volume numbers the way you do with statutes at large. You keep track by year. So that's the kind of citation you will see for USCAN. And then just a little bit of watch, rinse, repeat here. Turning to page 9, we see Public Law 93-406 as it appears in USCAN, and it pretty much looks the same. It's the same public law. There's not much to be changed. So page 9, we see our table of contents with our Title 1, Subject Area 1, Protection of Employee Rights. See the table of contents on page 10, and our section 514 that we've been looking at. We see Title 2, or Subject Area, Internal Revenue. And then we turn to page 11 and see the actual text of section 2 of Public Law 93-406. And then turning to page 12, we see the beginning of the text of section 514. Now I went through that really quickly because it's just the same as statutes at large, only a different unofficial source. But if anyone's confused, speak up. Okay. So now I'm going to do a little mini group workshop using Poll Everywhere. Has anybody used Poll Everywhere in any of your other classes? Is that a yes or a question? Oh, yay. Okay, yes. Okay, so for everybody, you can access it one way. If you've already used it, I guess you can go to your app. It might just be easier since I guessed that probably not everybody used it. So within our course website, if you go to modules, and we are now in the statutes module, and if you scroll down just a little bit in the statutes module, you will see handouts, and then you will see Poll Everywhere. If you go to that link, that will bring you to Poll Everywhere. Now what I'm going to click on my computer is going to look a little bit different because I've got the administrative end, but you should see something like this. Or you can go to the website or on your phone if you want to use it that way, polev.com/Hofstra Law. And once you get there, either by web link from the course website or who's ever using your phone. Pardon me? Okay, so under handouts, under statutes, you should see pole everywhere. No, actually, so I'm sorry. Is it not there? Nobody's on it?
That was too easy. I just did this.
Pardon me. All right. Sorry about that. That could be my error. My error. Okay. Try it. Refresh your screen and try it again. I apologize. You getting it now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. And I got to go back to full screen because otherwise you don't see it. Okay, now we should be good. So, are we all there? Anybody not there? For those of you who are there, go ahead and answer. I will. Okay, so you're still in secondary sources. Scroll down to statutes. There you go. A little bit more pull everywhere. Anybody else having trouble? We're going to do a few of these, so once you get it set, it'll be easy. We're all good? Anybody had trouble? So the generic name for a public law is session law. True or false? True. So did you click? Okay, and I am going to show responses. And so we have 94% true, which is the correct answer. And let's see if I can, it's not showing me how many people said false. But again, session law is like soda. Session law is like soda. You've got Coke, you've got Pepsi, you've got 7-Up, and you've got whatever else you all like to drink these days. It's all soda. So session laws are all laws passed by legislatures, signed by the executive. Public law is what we call it for federal laws. States have different names. We're going to talk about that next week. Everybody good with that? Okay, so let's go to our next question now that we've got this working properly. Public Law 111-148 was passed in which Congress? Okay, so everybody done? Anybody? So let's show responses. Yes, 111. Excellent. And last question for the moment. We'll come back to this after this question. The best description of the statutes at large is big heavy set with absolutely no relevance to existence, predecessor to the U.S. Code, official source for public laws, organized chronologically, official source public laws, organized by subject. I went from bottom to top. Give it a minute's thought. Give us your answer. Okay, I've got 2 holdouts. Tell me how many results you can see on, oh, okay, 1 holdout. All right. 2 responses. Okay, so official source public laws organized by subject, 78% of you. Official source public laws organized chronologically, 22%. This time the minority has it correct. So the statutes at large is, here's some disappointment. Okay, good. This is why we do this. That's okay if you're confused. This is why we do this. Okay, so who has this? Oh, I have the statutes at large part. So let's look at it. So we've got the statutes at large. You know, statutes at large. 93rd Congress, second session, 1974. So the statutes at large covers the public laws. Remember, the public laws passed by Congress, signed by the president, and then get put into the statutes at large. So you could have, and all that happens is over time, the volume increases. So volume 88 was in 1974. We could have, I don't know what volume we're up to these days in 2020, but 100 and something. And basically all that happens with the statutes at large is it puts those public laws in the statutes at large by public law number, chronologically. So session law sets are always organized chronologically. This is important. You care because, again, if you want to look up the law on a particular subject, statutes at large is not a good place to do it, right? Because it's not organized by subject. Also, statutes at large contains every single public law. Remember, we talked about the hundreds of public laws that get passed each year and going back 200 years. You really want to know what the laws are today. Statutes at large containing just those public laws give you all of them. The ones that have been repealed, the ones where parts of them have been amended and changed. So again, organized, that's why you care that you know that it's organized chronologically, because that's not the place to go for laws that are in force today. Everybody, the 72% of you okay with that? And you don't have to identify yourselves, just make sure you understand it. Okay. Moving along then, let's turn to page 13 of our walkthrough handout. So at long last, we're at the United States Code. Any questions before I dive into the United States Code on page 13? Okay. Here we see the listing of titles. Remember, titles are subject areas. So we see the listing of subject areas that are covered in the United States Code. So we see Title I is general provisions. And you just see the different numbers assigned to the different subject areas. So remember, we were looking at Title 29, which I mentioned in passing is the labor title. We also talked about Title 26 on the lower left-hand side, the Internal Revenue Code. And you see the other titles listed here. Actually, Luke, a relatively newly created title is Voting and Elections, Title 52. So the laws that used to be under the other titles when they created Title 52 got reclassified into that, just by way of example. So again, in the U.S. Code, now, in contrast to statutes at large, which again, remember, organized chronologically, the U.S. Code reflects the magic of codification. Remember, those of you who saw the screencast, I had some, whoops, where's my screencast? There we go. I had some fun with codification, referring to it as the force. But really, it is quite powerful for us for legal research, because once, for two reasons, really, and I've been saying this a lot, I'm going to say it a whole lot more, again, because it's arranged by subject. We're looking for laws by subject, not what was passed in 1963 on May 25th. We want the laws on bankruptcy, on real estate, on tax, on labor. And again, equally, possibly more important, I don't know which, doesn't matter, the laws that are in force today. Lots of laws get changed, repealed. The code will show us what's in force today. So let's take a look at a code section. And since we've been talking about it, I am going to hope Lexis will let us look at 29 USCS 1144. Okay, remember, USCS, USCA are unofficial codes, unofficial versions of the US code. So it's always going to start with USC, then a letter after. Don't worry about the difference. I'll talk about it briefly in a little while. So we're looking at 29 US Code 1144. And remember the title Effect on Other Laws? Well, that got changed from 1974. It's now just called Other Laws. And what we are going to look at to reinforce what we've been discussing, is the history. So it's just scrolling down to the bottom to the history section of 1144. Remember, at 291144, this is the code as it exists today. So this is section 1144 as it exists today. But we can see in the code, we can see its history. How did it come about? What happened to it? And this text here under history tells us a whole lot. So we're going to look at this for a little while. So it tells us that it was Act on September 2, 1974, PL, standing for Public Law, 93406. I already mentioned that to you. That's how I came up with this public law to look at. So this section 1144 came from PL 93406 in Title I. We had already seen that. Subtitle, so again, subject area 1 within Public Law 93406, Title 1, subject area 1, subtitle, so a sub-subject area, Part 5, and look at that, Section 514. So this is how we would find out where a code section came from, is by looking at the history here at the bottom. It's called something slightly different in Westlaw, and we'll look at that in a moment. But it tells us even more. Again, late night TV, but wait, there's more. So this section, 1144, we've confined 93406, section 514 at volume 88, stat, of course, remember, stands for statutes at large, and we can actually find this particular section on page 897. Okay, now we come to one of the most important parts of this history statement. And believe it or not, one of the most important parts of this history statement is this teeny little semicolon after 897. Can everybody see it? Probably not. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger without destroying everything here. Okay, you've got to scroll down a little. So far, so good. So here we are, 514, 88, 897, semicolon. What that said, why that semicolon is so important and why I am belaboring it is that semicolon is telling me, okay, so after me, very important semicolon is the next amendment. So what that semicolon is telling me is, here's all the information, and the semicolon essentially means and amended by. So section 1144 came from 93406, section 514, in this part of the statutes at large, and it was amended by this public law, 97-473 in 1983, and 1144 within this public law, 97-473, was amended by title or subject area 3 in that public law, section 301A and 301B, which all of which can be found in volume 96, statutes at large, page 2611 and 2613. And we see another semicolon, which means, anybody? And amended by. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Yeah.
And amended by. Okay, so and amended by. In August of 84, this public law 98-397, title or subject area 1, section 104 in title 1, found at volume 98, statutes at large, page 1436. And this semicolon is telling me again, everyone, humor me here. Everyone? And amended by. I know this is silly, but trust me, if you understand this, you will save yourself a lot of confusion. So, and amended by, again, in 1986, another public law number, 99-272. Title 9, subject area 9 within that public law number. Subtitle B within that title, section 9503D, found in 100 statutes at large 207. And I promise you one last time, semicolon means and amended by. It wasn't such a good response there, but I'm going to let you get away with it this time. Might not do it next time. And amended by once again. And no, I'm not going to read through this whole thing because I'll exhaust myself, not to mention make your eyes glaze over. The only other thing I'm going to mention is one interesting other aspect you can learn from this is the last time Congress amended this law. Not how up to date it is, because this law incorporates changes, as does Westlaw, incorporates changes almost as soon as they happen. But Congress, the last time Congress did anything was this section, is the last public law amending it. Now, it's not that important a fact, but it's good to know that the last time that Section 1144 was amended by Congress was in 2006 by Public Law 109-280, again, Title IX within that public law, so subject area 9, and this section, which lives at this point in statutes at large, or the planet statutes at large, so volume 120, stat 1093. So you all think you're comfortable reading this history statement? I know I went through it and a lot of repeating, made you repeat back to me, even worse. But hopefully that will help you understand. Okay. So one other source that I think also helps us understand how all this works, and also hopefully will explain why we care about this. So you're going to get references to statutes in different ways. You're going to get references to statutes by its public law. You're going to get reference to statutes by its U.S. Code section, by its public law section. You're going to get references to statutes by its name. How many of you have heard of the Civil Rights Act? Right? Yeah. So there's one where we've heard a lot about a statute by its popular name. So there is a way to figure out how to find a statute we know only by name, whether we want to find its public law, whether we want to find it in the U.S. Code, and again, depending on what we want to do, we may want to find one or the other, or both. And this is called the Popular Name Tool. The Popular Name Tool lives at the House of Representatives website. The link is on the course webpage. If you don't want to deal with the course webpage, if you Google House Popular Name Tool, if you can remember that, you'll get here as well. And it's just an alphabetical listing, not really that difficult to use. So if we were interested in ERISA, and actually I'm going to use Control F here, just because you don't want to watch me scroll. And actually ERISA does what a lot of lists do, is it refers me to another point of the list. So I want to scroll to Employee Retirement Income Security Act, because that's what the acronym stands for. Whoops. So I'm going to do the same thing. So there's the first instance. And sure enough, the Popular Name Tool tells me that the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974 was enacted by Public Law 93-406. We've only heard that a bunch of times now. Gives me its home, its statutes at large site, 88 Stat 829. That's where the page starts. And then again, it tells us where it now lives and got codified in the U.S. Code. So Title 29 U.S. Code, actually ERISA starts in Section 1001. And following. Again, remember, that's what ETSEC stands for. So that's one way to find statutes when we have a popular name, and hopefully also you see the difference. It reinforces the differences between the public law and the U.S. Code. Now, sometimes you may get, and I will prove this point in a moment, references to, so I'm going to prove the point now. Why wait? Lex didn't save my search, so let's go here. So a lot of times in court cases, especially in newspaper articles, what you get is a reference to a law, how it's applied today, but you get a reference to the public law section when it was originally passed. And that could be lots and lots of years ago. And that tends to happen with very popularly known acts in my experience. So here's an example of a news article from Law 360, news current awareness source. And it's talking about the Voting Rights Act. It's talking about a court, the Ninth Circuit opinion that happened very recently. This article is from January 28th of this year, so a few days ago, the article. And it's talking about a divided Ninth Circuit decision. So I imagine that decision was handed down not very long before this article, right? Excuse me. but it's referring to, as sometimes judges refer to in their opinions, don't ask me why, it's referring to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, the Voting Rights Act was passed in the 1960s. So if you wanted to read that section, we now know, right, that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act isn't going to be Section 2 in the U.S. Code. We now know that 2 and some other number aren't the same. How do we figure that out? Yes, we could Google it, and maybe you'd find it pretty quickly, but not always. So I'm not saying don't Google it, but I'm saying if you do Google and you don't find it, there is another way to do that. Excuse me. And the way you would do that is to go first to the popular name tool, and then find, because we have the popular name, so we would find the Voting Rights Act. So actually, oh, there we go, yeah. So Voting Rights Act. Okay, or we could just go to V. At this point, couldn't tell you what's going to be. So there we go. We're now down to V for Voting Rights Act, and the original Voting Rights Act was 1965. We now see we have the public law number 89-110. And from there, we now go to the super duper translation table. It's called the Table 3 tool. Again, the link is in the course website, or if you can remember, House Table 3 tool. And we know from our popular name tool that we want to look at 1965, and we know we want to look at public law 89-110. So here in the super duper translation table, Table 3 tool, we go to 1965. And then we go to 89-110, just double checking. I have the worst memory for numbers. 89-110. And that's how we can translate from the Act section to the Code section. So, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that we got referred to in that Lexis article is in Title 52 of the U.S. Code, Section 10301. Everybody follow that process? So again, a couple of reasons why we care about all these popular names and public laws, one of which is you want to be able to find these references. Okay, so let's see how we do with all this. I'm going to go back. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to go back to Poll Everywhere now that we got it working. And I'm going to go back to full screen. And I'm going to go next to our next poll question. So if you have the name of an act, for example, the Affordable Care Act, what is the best way to find it in the U.S. Code? Don't know why I jumped down and then up, but okay. Okay, got a couple of holdouts. And someone, they just don't want to commit, huh? I don't even know who you are. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. So let's see what we got. So if you have the name of an act, Affordable Care Act, what is the best way to find it in the U.S. Code? So statutes at large. So if I tell you Affordable Care Act, how would you know where to go in statutes at large? There are at least 100 volumes. ALR, again, how would you know where to go in ALR? I'm sure it talks about Affordable Care Act. Everybody does. No one went for the ask it. Okay. And most of you found the right answer. Look in a popular name table. Now, the statutes at large isn't entirely incorrect. The statutes at large may have an index or its own popular name table. But why go that extra step? You can just go directly to the popular name table, and it's on the web, which, of course, is always nice and easy. Okay. So let's go to our next question. If you have the name of an act, for example, the Affordable Care Act, what is the best way to find its public law number? It's kind of a trick question, but not really. How are we doing? Oh, good. Up to 17. 2 more seconds. There we go. Alrighty, and let's look at the responses. Again, we have fans of the statutes at large. Again, not entirely incorrect, but not the best way. Again, the popular name table. If you have the name, think about it. If you have the name, look in the name table. It's a good way to remember it. Okay, moving to the next question. So now we get a little more challenging. So I'm asking you to go to that popular name tool online. Again, the link is in our statutes module. I've also, if you're looking on the computer, you can copy and paste this. Or if you're looking on your laptop, you can copy and paste and find the public law number for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this will take you a little more time, in fairness. So in the popular name table, find the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and tell us the public law. If you're having trouble getting there, let me know. Another minute. 3 remaining answers. Come on. Oh, that's what it's doing. Oh, looks like I got my results a little earlier than intended. Sorry about that if you were still working on it. So here we've got our responses. 100%, 88,352. Excellent. So I was trying to copy and paste the URL so I could walk you through it, but we have 100% correct. So I don't even need, well, now back to, oh, a couple of people got a little confused. Okay, so then let's walk through it if that's the case. So I'm going to go to the popular name table. I don't even have to copy. And so in the popular name tool, could copy and paste, or here we are. Instead of the Voting Rights Act, I'm going to go to the Civil Rights Act. And yes, I could do Control F or scroll through Civil Rights Act. Scroll back up. Of 1964, and here we see the answer 88,352. So for those few folks who are a little confused, make sense? Okay. Whoops, that's not where we want to go. We want to go there. And we want to go back to Poll Everywhere. And let's go to our next question. And actually have to go to full screen. Okay. So if the section number you are interested in is section 2 of the public law, then it will be numbered section 2 in the U.S. Code. True or false? Okay, I'll wait another couple seconds for the last holdout. There we go. And let's look at responses. Okay. Again, most of you got it right. Absolutely not the case. Again, the section number in the public law will just about never be the same when it gets transferred over to the U.S. Code. Let's take a quick look at, I think the best way I can explain it is to look at a public law number and see. So here we see the Act section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth. If we see, so that's the public law section here on the left-hand column. If we look at the code section here toward the right, notice the numbers are absolutely totally different. So those couple of people who are a little confused, I hope this helps. Try to remember, again, public law section number, not the same as the U.S. Code section number. Okay, one more question. Let's go back to the full screen. Okay, again, a little bit more challenging. Go to the translation table, the super duper translation table, the table 3-2 tool, excuse me. The link is online again at the statutes module, or you can copy and paste what I've got here. Find the U.S. Code section for section 1563 sub A of Public Law 111-148 from 2010. So we want the U.S. Code section for section 1563A of Public Law 111-148. This one, I grant, is kind of a trick question, but it's a little more difficult. Okay, another minute for the couple of people still working. All right, I'm not sure if we're missing a couple of people. I don't know if you're, oh, one more there. All righty. There we go. So what do we got? Okay, so most people got the right answer. It's hidden on the screen, unfortunately, because of all the recording stuff. Let's see if I can move that. Come on. There we go. So section 300 GG-21. Not sure what other folks would have been looking at 1001, because honestly, I just made that choice up out of whole cloth. But again, going to that, actually, let's get out of here. Going to that super duper translation table and looking up, I have to go back, I don't remember the number, 111 and 148 from 2010. So let's go back. So find 2010, 111-148. And the section at question is 1563A. 1563A. So just scrolling down to 1563A, we see 300 GG-21. Any questions? Okay, so part of the reason I'm spending so much time with going over the public laws, again, is in part because you'll get these references to the public laws that you'll want to be able to find, like in that article I showed you. Another reason is when we talk about legislative history in a couple of weeks. I know one of you at least had a question in the screencast, so that question I'll actually postpone for a few weeks, but we will be talking about legislative history quite a bit. So that's another reason you want to understand what the public laws, how the numbering works, what they are, how they work, and how to find them, and how to translate between public law and U.S. Code section. Any questions about that? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the U.S. Code generally, and then we'll take a break and come back and look very much more in depth at the U.S. Code. And by generally, what I'm going to talk a little bit about are the different publications of the U.S. Code. So I talked about how the official publication is the U.S. Code, abbreviated USC, and we have a couple of unofficial versions, the USCA and the USCS. So let's take a closer look at the U.S. Code, the official version, which is back in our walkthrough handout on page 14. So what you'll notice on page 14 is that it says 2012 edition. If you look a little bit lower down, you'll see this is in fact Title 29, the labor title. And you'll see my handy dandy arrow there that this including ending January 2nd, 2013. So this only takes us through 2013. So the official US code, for reasons I'm not really sure, when they first started publishing the US code as it exists today, not quite 100 years ago, then the history doesn't really matter, they decided to publish each edition once every 6 years. Why they chose 6 years, I don't understand. Why they chose this particular system of every 6 years instead of every year, I don't understand. But that's how it works. So 2012 is the most recent edition for Title 29. Now you might say, okay, she just said every 6 years, 2012 and 6 is 2018. It's 2020. Why isn't there a 2018 edition? And the answer to that is, at least for Title 29, it hasn't come out yet. Our federal government, and this has been true for the US Code, at least for as long as I have been doing this, which is almost 30 years, the US Code is always a couple years behind. Again, I couldn't tell you why. What we are looking at on the screen is the US Code available to us on Hein Online. And the reason I'm showing it to you on Hein Online is, first, it's one place you can get it on the web, the official version, but also it gives you the list of all the editions. So I think it's a very good visual representation of how the editions work. So there is a 2018 edition. So if we were interested in something in Title 15, we could find the 2018 edition. But we're not. We're interested in Title 29. So the way that the government updates is through supplements each year, because for whatever reason they chose this system, they did understand that the laws change every year, and that you want to know what the laws are. So they publish supplements each year. So since it's 6 years between edition, it goes from supplement 1 through 5. So taking a look at the 2012 edition. Actually, I don't want to look at that. So here's the 2012 edition. We see all the main volumes, and then we see the supplements. Turning so you can see this up close and personal to page 15, you see supplement 5 of the 2012 edition, and you see that brings us up to January 12, 2018. Again, not especially current, but that's as far as the US Code will bring us. So we can get to 29, we can get to January of 2018. I shall pass this around for those who want to do some weightlifting or take a look at the US Code volumes in person. What I zoomed through here, again, just to show you, here's the 2018 edition of the US Code on Hein Online. And here on Hein Online, it goes through Title 14. Actually, when I went to the shelf earlier to get these books, I saw that in the library, we actually have through Title 26. So interestingly, the books are a little more up to date than Hein Online. Who knew? Again, the point being for Title 29, which is what we care about, we still don't have the 2018 edition. So the US Code only brings us to 2018. We only get as far as 2018 for even the 2018 edition, even in this earlier title. The whole point of this whole explanation is the US Code is not the best place to go to see what the law currently is today. Remember, that's one of the magic, magic of the force is that the codification, the US Code, gives us the law as it is currently today. But here I'm just telling you the US Code only goes through 2018. Where good old free enterprise comes into play and commercial publishers realize, hey, you lawyers, you need the law as it is today. 2018 isn't good enough. So they publish, in the old days print, nowadays in addition to print, online, unofficial codes. The US Code Annotated, USCA, we find on Westlaw. The US Code Service, USCS, we find on Lexis. Here's what they look like in the print versions, different colors to help us keep track. Probably, I'm guessing, at least for federal codes, you won't use the print version very much, but for state codes, you might. Again, we'll talk about state codes next week. So there's the print versions of the unofficial US Code, USCA, USCS. Again, late night TV, but wait, there's more. So these are known as annotated codes, the unofficial codes, USCA, USCS. They're annotated with extra research help for lawyers. So in addition to the text of the statute, the USCA and USCS will also give us research references. It will give us references to secondary sources to help explain the section we're looking at. The USCA and USCS, as I mentioned, are also much more up to date. Actually, I'm going to steal that from you, Taylor. In print, you have to remember to look at the pocket bar. So a unique to legal publication, I believe. We have a little pocket in the back, and we have this little paper pocket bar. Some secondary sources use this method as well. Online, as I alluded to earlier, you don't really have to worry about that. Lexis and Westlaw and Bloomberg incorporate the changes actually incredibly quickly. So the U.S. Code annotated, the U.S. Code Service, these annotated codes, or what they call, are really going to be your BFF for statutory research. You really will not have to look at the official U.S. Code if you're doing topical legal research for a client. Now, I know you need to do it for your journals, and I'm not saying don't do it. Well, I am saying don't do it because there really is no point these days, but that's another conversation for another time and another place. But for research, for regular research, when you need to know what the law currently is today, you want to look at an annotated code. Online is fine. If you want to go in print, some people still prefer doing statutory research in print. Okay, so that is an introduction to annotated codes. We will now take our break. It is 5:30. Let's come back at 5:40, and we're going to talk about how to find statutes and how to take advantage of our BFF, the annotated codes. And moving from talking about the different places to find the code and why we want to go to the annotated code, our BFF, let's talk a little bit about how you find statutes. Now, we've already started this conversation when we talked about secondary sources, right? Because secondary sources is in part stuff to help you find the law, and statutes is the law. So I have up here one of the secondary sources that we found a few weeks ago when investigating our issue for our client. This is the ALR article, Liability of Third-Party Healthcare Payor. You see all my highlights here, highlighting how it is relevant to our client's issue. And sure enough, as we scroll down and start to read the ALR article, we discover in the footnotes that we are getting references to the statutes, and I believe it's good old footnote number 7 that refers us at least to the preemption section that we've been talking about all day, 29 USC 1144. So secondary sources are definitely one fabulous way to get references, to figure out is your issue a statutory one? And if so, where are the statutes? But unfortunately, you can't stop at secondary sources because a lot of times, depending on how you structure your keyword search, you may get only one aspect of your particular issue. Remember, preemption is only one part of the question. Our overall question is, can we sue? And remember, in looking at our other secondary sources, if we got really lucky, we got another reference to section 1132, but we may or may not run into that. So you also want to make sure to use a second method. And again, this is when you've got a really complex issue like the one we're talking about, and you have the budget and the time to be this extensive. So a couple of the other different sources I would recommend, one of which you're all familiar with, is a keyword search. Now, we've been keyword searching and just looking at secondary sources. You can keyword search and filter to statutes. Another way to do that, or rather another method you can use, is looking at an index. We talked a little bit about indexes for secondary sources, but index also exists for primary sources. And the best way I know of to get to the index, well, is through the browse menu. So I'm going to statutes and I'm going to the US Code annotated. And we see a whole bunch of different resources on the right, and in here we see the index. Now, it's not very pretty online. Honestly, I think I mentioned this last time. Sometimes I just prefer the print just because to try to click and scroll, sometimes it's good to have a couple of books open at once. That's just a personal preference. Maybe it's just what I'm used to. But if you're finding this awkward, but finding that the index is useful, you might want to think about it. And quickly, just to review, if you did want to do a keyword search, if you knew it was statutes, you might want to filter immediately. You can do just a general search. So we had talked about, go back to my favorite search, liability, HMO. Wait for it, it's thinking. And then we can filter by statutes. We might, again, want to filter again by jurisdiction. I wouldn't start my research. So this research project, if a partner came into my office and said, do this research, I wouldn't start in statutes. First of all, I might not have known about ERISA to begin with. I would have definitely started in the secondary sources. I would have looked at that ALR article. I would have found some of those law review articles. So I certainly would have gotten a start understanding that ERISA was involved. But then I would then go and take a look and try a keyword search in the statutes, or maybe look at the index. Okay, so now let's take a look specifically at the annotated code features once we find a section or sections that are useful to see how they can help us with our research. Now, I should mention, I've been talking about annotated codes being your BFF, your very, very best friend. Annotated codes are available primarily on Lexis or Westlaw, the annotated code books I passed around. Annotated Bloomberg has a what I call a kind of annotated code. It doesn't have quite as many features as Lexis and Westlaw, but it's got some of them, and we'll look at that in just a little while. For the unannotated code, you can find that in a lot of different places on the web. In addition to the print US code, we saw the US code officially on Hein Online. There's another US government site called GovInfo where you can find the US code. I personally prefer the US code at the House of Representatives site, which we'll talk about in a little while. And again, if you're Googling, you can find it at the Legal Information Institute. These are all sites that I know are reliable. GovInfo is the government publication office. We know House of Representatives is the House of Representatives, and Legal Information Institute we've talked about as a wonderfully reliable legal portal and sometimes explanatory site for legal materials. It comes out of Cornell, so again, we can have some confidence that it is reliable. So as promised, let's take a look at an annotated code, and I'm going to go directly to our section. So 29 USC. I can, by the way, you don't have to remember, do I type in USCA or USCS? Don't worry about that. Just type in USC. So 29 USC 1144. And here we see section 1144 on Westlaw. So I would say always. I don't usually say always, if that makes any sense, but I would say always. If you've got a statutory section that's relevant, look in the table of contents. I was having a very nice conversation with Emily before class, and she loved the table of contents and secondary sources. Yay! More important, believe it or not, for statutory codes. It's a code. That means, by definition, it's subject arranged. So if you find one relevant section, since it's arranged by subject, you may, not always, you may find other relevant sections on that subject. Lexis and Westlaw make it super easy. Bloomberg too. We have a link here, table of contents. And what pops up here is our section 1144 other laws. And I can scroll up and see, are there any other ones that look useful? Maybe I would identify 1132 civil enforcement. Oh yeah, that's kind of what I want to do, civil enforcement. That's admittedly a little iffy. I can't tell you how many times I've done research for whatever reason, and I get a reference from a secondary source, and I get the title, and I get a particular section, and I know that section isn't exactly on point, but I know it's the title looks like it's in the same area. So I go to that section, I go to the table of contents, I either click on table of contents or I just click my way up the hierarchy here in this heading information. So here's 1144. 1144 is under Part 5, Administrative Enforcement. So I would click on that and I would take a look and scroll down and see what looks useful. If I didn't see anything there, I might go up a level. So I'm going back to 1144 for the moment. And by up a level, I mean subtitle B, regulatory provisions. I would look at that. I might click one up a little. And again, I'd read this to see, is this still relevant to my issue? If it's no longer relevant, then I won't click on it. But regulatory provisions could be relevant. Protection of employee benefits rights certainly could be relevant. And I would scroll down and look. So here's an example. By going up a couple of levels, I discover there's a definition section. Remember my inartful phrase, law is words, and my suggestion to you, look at that definition section. See if it applies to any of the terms that are important to you in your issue. Look at the definition section if it's got its own section or even within a particular section. Look at definitions. So 1144 actually has a subsection labeled definitions. So I'm kind of combining two tips there. So let me uncombine them, if that's a word, for a moment. Look at the table of contents. Work your way up the hierarchy to see if you find other sections that are of interest. Again, take advantage of the fact that you are looking at a code. You are looking at a subject arranged resource. Look at the subject arrangement. More often than not, that's how I find the relevant sections. Not by a particular reference or my keyword search, but by recognizing, my keyword search result is close, not on point. Let me see what I find around it. Again, I'm repeating myself intentionally to emphasize that point, that the table of contents so many times in statutes is really going to be your way of finding the relevant sections, as well as checking to see other relevant sections. Maybe you found one relevant section in your secondary source like we did, hooray, but there may be other additional relevant sections. Okay. Another feature, so what I'm going to do in showing you the annotated code is I'm going to go through Westlaw, show you the features, I'm going to show you the same features, Lexis and Bloomberg, and then we'll look in print, just so you have a sense of where I'm going here. So table of contents, super important. I'm going to scroll down here to the bottom to show you the history. Except on Westlaw, they call it credits. Don't ask me why they can't use the more logical term history, right? Because it's the history of 1144. But they don't. They didn't ask me. What can I tell you? So you need to remember on Westlaw, it's called something I think not quite as intuitive, credits. If it makes sense to you, great. Then you can remember it. It's basically the credits for how this section came about. I don't know. Maybe it's kind of Hollywoodish where you got all the credits at the end. Whatever works for you. So we see the exact same information. So the credits, same as the history, tells us this section, 1144, originally started, came about by public law, was enacted by, public law 93-406, Title I, Section 517, 1974. This section also, the semicolon means, human me, please? And amended by, and changed by works too. I'll take that as well. So and amended by and changed by this later public law. And no, I'm not going to make you go through that again, I promise. So the most important piece of information here is when this when this section was enacted. When this section was enacted, and that's the first public law. That's typically going to give you the information about this section. Now, it's been amended a few times, and again, By way of reference, not very important. The last time it was amended was in 2006. But the important information, again, is when it was enacted. The most important, at least for now. So those are the. Now here's where we get to the power of the annotated code and why I refer to it as our BFF. Here are those research references. On Westlaw, they call it context and analysis. And basically it's just references to secondary sources, but secondary sources that specifically discuss 1144. So if you're pretty confused about this whole preemption thing, and I know at this stage I sure am, I can get more explanation and I can choose my favorite type of secondary source. Maybe I want a brief explanation in encyclopedias, something more in depth in treatises. Maybe later on I'm interested if there are forms to help me draft a complaint or something like that. All law reviews, I know many of you are journal fans. I can find any type that I want and get more explanation. So let's just for a moment to emphasize my point. So y'all like, you want to look at a law review article, here are a whole bunch of law review articles talking about ERISA preemption. Again, because 1144 is about ERISA preemption, here are law review articles to give me more detail. That is not something you will find on Google. It's not something you will find on those codes I showed you on the web. It's not something you'll find in the US code. Questions? Okay. Again, but wait, there's more. We have notes of decisions and citing references. They do kind of the same thing with regard to cases. So let's take a look at, but they give you different information. So notes of decisions give you essentially summaries, very, very short summaries of cases that discuss your section. I noticed in one of the questions in the screencast for statutes, someone was asking me, should I start in statutes or should I start in cases? And my answer is no, start in secondary sources. But eventually, yes, you do need to get to statutes and you do need to get to cases. And the beautiful thing about not starting in cases, and I know you all, not you all, many law students and even a lot of lawyers want to start in cases because that's what they discuss through law school. If your issue is a statutory issue, you're much better off, again, starting secondary sources and then moving to the statute. Why? Because the statute will give you references to cases. The annotated code will give you references to cases that interpret your section number. So we've got 1144, and here we have a whole bunch of cases that interpret 1144. What the notes of decision do for you is they give you the topics of those interpretations. So here I can scroll through and see the different topics of cases. So here, topic number 16 is preemption generally. Here's 18 is ERISA preemption. I can scroll through. There are a whole lot here. I can also search these notes of decisions. Now, I'm not searching the entire cases. I'm searching the little summaries here that we see for each case. And again, notice I have to use my Boolean connectors that we talked about. So if I want to search denial of care, so oops, I need a space between my connector and my word. Denial space /p space care. Westlaw will search its little summaries of the notes of decisions, and it will refer me to those. I don't know why it said in that main screen no results, because if you click on the left here, you get the results. So just ignore that. So you do get those notes of decisions, those topics. So these are basically just topics, a listing of topics that the cases discuss. And as I just showed you, you can search them and see your results of where your search results are in those notes of decisions and searching just the summaries of those cases. So I can identify, ooh, look, here's a whole bunch of topics on health insurance. and I can see those cases. And a nice thing, of course, on Westlaw is I can click and look at those cases. Citing references does a little bit differently. You can see citing references gives us all sorts of different types of documents, including secondary sources. Citing references is take that very literally. It's just what cites to your section. So it could cite to your section very briefly and be discussing something totally different. So that's why these numbers are going to tend to be much bigger than what you look at a context and analysis for secondary sources or what you look at in notes of decisions for cases. But you can see what cases cite to your section. You can see what secondary sources cite to your section. For my time and money, I prefer context and analysis and notes of decisions because they're more targeted to my subject. So that's why I refer to annotated codes as your BFF. It gives you background and secondary sources. It does some of the research for you. It gives you cases that talk about your section. You can't get better than that, right? It's doing the research for you. So that's why I say it's your BFF. Questions on Westlaw? I'm going to take a quick run through Lexis so you can see how your BFF annotated code on Lexis works. Table of contents here to the left expands out. So again, always check the table of contents. It'll take you a minute. At worst, you don't find anything. At best, you find more or better relevant sources. Again, I would click my way up the heading here. So I would check out the subdivision administrative enforcement, which comes under this subdivision protection of employee benefit rights. And I would click my way up that way as well to see if there are additional sections in this code area, in this topic area, that are of interest to me. Looks a little bit different on Lexis, but if we want to look at secondary sources, we go to the Go To menu, drop down, and go to Research References. We can also just scroll. Lexis has the entire annotated code section in one screen, so you can just keep on scrolling, or you can use this navigation bar up top. So Lexis looks a little bit different. It doesn't organize the research references in a way we can click directly, so we'd have to come down and scroll. You could use Control F a little creatively if you wanted to do that as well. And again, the big difference between Lexis and Westlaw and the annotated code is in the secondary sources. And that's because Lexis has Lexis secondary sources and Westlaw has West published secondary sources, where Thomson Reuters, the owner of West. So your secondary source references will be quite different. Lexis also has notes of decisions. Sometimes Lexis calls it case notes. Don't ask me why they go back and forth, so just recognize both names are the same thing. And again, we have these topics of notes of decisions that we can browse through if we want to see what looks, or do a Control F, browse through, see what looks of interest. So I just saw denial of benefits generally. Might want to jump down and check those out. We can also search the document. If we wanted to search the notes of decisions, actually we would wind up searching the entire document. But to show you what that looks like, denial/P care, same search I did before. And it has to think a little bit. A lot. Come on, Lexis. There we go. Have to encourage it a little. So here we see where our search terms appear, and not surprisingly, it's not in the text of the statute, but in the notes of decision. So we see the results, our search results. You can also do Control F, but of course Control F won't let you do /P or /S. Up to you. Any questions about Lexis? Last, and I'm going to have to say probably least, in this context, Bloomberg. And I say probably least, again, because you won't find the secondary source references. So here you see the code. Also, don't get confused. The table of contents here refers to the table of contents for section 44. So the subsections A, B, and so forth is what you will see in this table of contents. To get to the code table of contents that I'm extolling you to check every single time, that's what this heading information will do. So I keep on telling you, work your way up the heading information. That's the only way to do it on Bloomberg. But you can check the table of contents that way, just by clicking on these heading links. As mentioned, there are no secondary source reference, but there are notes of decision. Bloomberg calls it smart code. So you click on smart code and then you tell Bloomberg to launch smart code. Don't ask me why they make you do it twice. And you see here the cases that mention 1144. You can limit by topic. You can also look at a case and see the topics that Bloomberg assigns and then limit it that way as well. You could also limit by court. And strength of discussion. Okay. Any questions about annotated codes online? Let's take a look at the annotated code in print and go back to our walkthrough handout. Again, I would guess most of you will have access to Lexis or Westlaw. Most likely not Bloomberg yet, wherever you wind up working, and most likely your package will have the federal statutes because, of course, they cover the entire United States. May or may not have all of 50 state codes, actually most likely not if you're in a smaller organization. Some attorneys, and not even all the really old attorneys, actually prefer statutes in print. Again, that concept of not having to scroll or look at this, go to two different screens, sometimes having a couple of different statute sections open in two different books in front of you can be helpful. It's personal preference, but I like to show statutory codes because some people do prefer them in print. So here we're seeing basically just the title page of the little maroon book that went around. I'm not sure where it ended up. Doesn't matter. There we go. Thank you, Vanessa, for the show and tell. Turning to page 17, we see the table of contents just as we saw before. So I'm noting up top with the handy dandy arrow, chapter 18 is our Employee Retirement Income Security Program, and I'm highlighting once again, always good to check the definitions section. And so here we are on page 3. Turning the page of your handout now from page 17 to page 18. Page 3 referred to the actual page of the book. So page 18 of the handout. Again, looking at the table of contents, always good to look at whatever format you're in. So you might notice, again, the definition sections. You might see fiduciary duties. Oh, maybe could I use that concept to help my client? Again, civil enforcement might occur to you as you scan the table of contents. And of course, we already know about section 1144. Even though it's called other laws, it's really the preemption section. That, by the way, is why researching codes can be so tricky. Because we know it's the preemption section, but the word preemption does not appear anywhere in the text of 1144. You would find it if you did a keyword search online because some of those notes of decisions mention the word preemption. In fact, a lot of them mention the word preemption. So your keyword search would pull it up that way. But that's why searching statutory codes can be kind of tricky because of that very specialized vocabulary. Okay, so from page 18, let's skip page 19. We've talked a little bit about 1132. I don't think we have to say much more. And let's go to page 20. So if we got a reference to 1144, and this, which we did in ALR, and this was the first page that we turned to in print, if we wanted to look at the table of contents, what we would want to do is notice that 1144 is in chapter 18. Notice I've got that circled on the top right of the page. And then we just literally flip back in the book till we find the beginning of chapter 18, and that's where the table of contents is. sometimes can get a little tricky in print. One reason online is actually much easier. I will grant you that. So that would be how you would do it in print. And notice we're on page 610, so we would have had to flip all the way back in the book to page 3. So this is what it looks like in the book, 1144. Turn to the page, we see that definition section within 1144. So again, worth reading carefully through to see, are these definitions important to me? Perhaps the term state law and how it's defined may be important for our client. Turning to page 22. So on page 22, we see what's called history on Lexis. It's called credits on Westlaw, and it doesn't have any name in print. So I refer to it as the parenthetical at the end of the section. And no, I don't have a better name for it because at least it's somewhat descriptive, right? There are parentheses and it's at the end of the section. So that's how you would find the history and the public law number that enacted this particular section, which we are now hopefully very familiar with, Public Law 93-406. And you see the same semicolon and amended by here as well. They just go by different names. Any questions about that? Okay, and then because this is an annotated code, this is the U.S. Code annotated in print, not on Westlaw. It has some of our annotated code features that makes it our BFF. So we see historical and statutory notes. I'm going to skip over that. For now, we'll come back to that when we talk about legislative history. We see promulgation of regulations. So that tells us, yes, there are regulations. We would have seen that in the references on Westlaw as well. That also comes under, pretty sure, context and analysis. Actually, citing references. I'm sorry. So that what we see there on page 23, promulgation of regulations, the equivalent of that is under citing references regulations. So that tells us there are regulations. Again, we'll talk about regulations and administrative law later on, later in the semester. And now, again, our BFF, or annotated code, we see the references to secondary sources, to law reviews. Turning the page, we'll see to treatises and forums and encyclopedias, not in that order. So you see on page 24, it's labeled research references, but really it's ALR. Then on page 25, it's encyclopedias. Page 26, treatises. And page 27, notes of decision. Now, have I gone too fast through that? Yeah, just showing you what it looks like in print. Okay, at long last, we get to notes of decisions and what that looks like in print. And again, you see the topics here, same topics we saw on Westlaw. If you're looking in print, you would just have to scan through these different topics to discover ones of interest. So turning to page 28, you might notice that health maintenance organizations looks interesting. So you would know to turn to topic number 201. I continue looking through, and on page 29, notice malpractice, torts looks interesting. So you might also want to look at topic number 250. The point here is don't stop at just one topic, look through and see and jot down the numbers of all that look interesting. And then turn to that topic number. And the way you do that is just look up top and you'll see the note numbers. So on page 30 of the handout, we have note 199. And that's where we can find topic number 201 because it started 199 and then it jumped to 200 and 201. And there we see the case summaries as well as the citations. Turning to page 31. We see note 201 continuing. Okay, so are we done? We've seen everything we wanted to see about 1144. We don't have to do anything else. I see maybe one head shaking now. Just stretching. So especially in print, heck no, we have to update, and update. It's the first time I've got to do that this semester. You're going to hear that a lot more. Especially in print, you need to remember to check that pocket part. Remember that funky little paper thing we saw in the back? Anytime you're using print, you need to either be aware of when it was last updated or make sure you update. So check 1144 or whatever your section is in the pocket part. And what that looks like in print when you do that is starting on page 32. So you see what the title page looks like, and that's just telling us it's the 2019 cumulative annual pocket part. You'll notice the library stamp, that just tells you when the library received it, but that tells me, okay, if we didn't receive it till June, we're probably not going to receive this pocket part till the 2020 pocket part till next June. Turning to page 33, so we're just turning number order to 1144, we see other laws. Then right after that, we see notes of decisions. What that is telling me is that there is no change to 1144 in the pocket part. All the pocket part is doing is updating me on more recent cases since the main volume that have been decided talking about 1144. And that makes sense if you think about it, right? Because remember, we looked and I said it's not that important, and it's not, that the last time Congress amended this section was in 2006. So an annual pocket part updating for what happens in 2019 isn't going to change, isn't going to have any difference if anything changed if the last time Congress made any amendments was 2006. And the other thing it tells, the pocket part in print tells us, if you look back on page 32, it tells us place in the back of the 2018 bound volume. Now, so this pocket part only covers a year. What's going to happen across the years, next year we'll get a new pocket part and it's going to cover 2 years. But by looking at this, I'll know, okay, if I know that the last time Congress amended it was 2006, if this main volume is newer than 2006, I'm probably not going to see anything in the pocket. Now, I may see updated research references, updated cases, which might be useful, but I'm not going to see any changes to the text of the code section. Any questions? So these annotations and the fact that it is far more up to date than the US code is one of the reasons that we pay a whole lot of money for Lexis and Westlaw. I mean, it's one reason you have to be so cost conscious, and because Lexis Westlaw charge so much, they are giving us, I think, some value, especially in the annotated code. Now, I mentioned that Lexis and Westlaw incorporate changes at when Congress does amend a section. Lexis and Westlaw incorporate them pretty quickly. So you don't really have to worry too much about how current Lexis and Westlaw is. Sometimes can be a couple of weeks behind. One thing we will talk about next time that you do need to think about, though, are these key site flags. So when I'm talking about updating, it's going to be a little bit different, and we will look at these key site flags next time. I just wanted to address that now so you knew that we were going to talk about that, and if you were wondering about that, to hold your curiosity for a week if you could. Any questions? Okay, so let's finish up with another more traditional type workshop, just to hopefully make sure that you understand what we talked about with regard to annotated codes. So I'll pass this around. I did my level best to make this as clear as possible, but if there's something you don't understand, please do ask.